Kentucky's 2026 legislative session started Tuesday, and since then, lawmakers have been busy filing bills to support their agenda.
WKYT's Kristen Kendi gives us a closer look at some of the legislation being proposed in Frankfort so far this session.
The bills filed are really starting to add up. Hundreds now between the state Senate and the House. Dozens of those bills are focused on education. One of the largest education bills filed so far, with 12 Republican sponsors, would prohibit diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in schools and within the State Department of Education. It would keep districts from spending money on any K-12 DEI resources and would allow the Attorney General to make districts comply with the law. Senator Lindsey Tichenor is leading the charge. She filed Senate Bill 26. We found two bills focused on school lunches. House Bill 250 would amend an existing statute. It would require school councils to give students a lunch period of at least 30 minutes. Representative Ashley Tackett Lafferty from Eastern Kentucky is sponsoring that bill. Staying in the cafeteria, House Bill 277 is about school nutrition. Representative Stephen Doan wants to ban schools from selling or providing ultra-processed foods during the school day. We are still in the first week of this legislative session, so not a lot of movement on bills just yet. We're still waiting for many to get assigned to specific committees.